On the nights of August 8th and 9th, 1969 in Los Angeles, California, 7 people were stabbed to death in their homes by members of the Manson family. This was not a random or sudden tragedy. It was the end result of a system that began with a seemingly reasonable promise. Charles Manson spoke to those who felt lost in the world. He offered them a new kind of family, one built on love without conditions, a place where the self could be set aside, where individual identity dissolved into shared consciousness, where freedom meant surrender to something larger. At the beginning, nothing about the Manson family felt extreme. It felt liberating. The promise was not danger, it was order. For many who encountered Charles Manson in the late 1960s, the first sensation was not fear, it was relief. The world outside felt fragmented, loud, unstable. Freedom existed but without instruction, choice existed but without clarity. Manson did not arrive as a rebel. He did not announce himself as a prophet. He arrived as someone who seemed to have already resolved the confusion everyone else was still naming. He listened, carefully, longer than most people did. He asked questions that felt unusually precise, questions that did not challenge confusion, but organized it. Where others offered opinions, he offered alignment. Where others imposed meaning, he reflected it back. Not perfectly, but just enough altered to feel clearer than before. Nothing was demanded, nothing was rushed. Structure entered quietly. He spoke about the ego as weight, identity as something artificial, pain not as tragedy, but as evidence of misalignment. These ideas were not framed as loss, they were framed as relief. If the self was the source of suffering, then dissolving it sounded merciful. If society was incoherent, then stepping outside it felt honest. He did not attack belief systems, he repositioned them. Doubt became a signal of insight. Discomfort became proof of growth. Belonging followed without ceremony. There were no rules, no announced hierarchy, and yet direction always moved in one direction. From the inside, this felt organic. From the outside, it would later appear rehearsed. Family was redefined, not biological, not conditional. Acceptance felt constant, approval felt calibrated, small gestures carried disproportionate weight. Eye contact, silence, a nod, attention became currency. Purpose came last, not as instruction, as inevitability. He spoke in metaphors that required completion. Meaning was not given, it was discovered, and discovery feels earned. Ownership makes belief durable. At no point did it feel like surrender, it felt like clarity. By the time doubt surfaced, it had already been reframed. Questioning was no longer resistance, it was confirmation that the process was working. Trust did not replace doubt loudly, it replaced it quietly, by making doubt unnecessary. And that is where the story begins. Control did not arrive as a doctrine, it arrived as a way of speaking. Manson rarely contradicted anyone directly. Instead, he reflected their words back, with slight alterations, a removed qualifier, a simplified cause, a sharper emphasis. Listeners felt understood, sometimes for the first time. not because they were taught something new, but because confusion was mirrored and gently reorganized. Language narrowed options, and fewer options felt like clarity. He favored words without edges, nothing, free, real, love. Their ambiguity was functional. Each listener projected meaning into them and received that meaning back as confirmation. Over time, shared vocabulary replaced private interpretation. When words are shared but meanings remain vague, disagreement becomes difficult to articulate. You can feel misaligned without being able to explain why. He often said, "There's nothing to it." The phrase dissolved complexity. Fear softened. Hesitation lost language. Incentives followed attention. Praise was rare, which made it powerful. Those who mirrored his cadence, his pauses, his phrasing received warmth. Those who questioned encountered neutrality. No punishment, just absence. Approval became something you felt slipping before you realized you needed it. Fear entered indirectly. The outside world was described as asleep, artificial, fragmented. Leaving was not dangerous, it was regressive, not a threat, a diminishment. Once meaning lived primarily inside the group, separation implied loss of insight. Staying felt protective. Isolation came through redefinition. Family ties were not severed. They were reframed as illusions. Conventional relationships were transactional, ego-driven, unreal. The group, by contrast, was described as unconditional, though alignment determined inclusion. Authority hid behind denial. Manson insisted he was nobody, that everyone was free. This made opposition difficult. You cannot rebel against someone who claims not to lead, and yet, interpretive authority flowed through him. He decided what was real, what was ego, what was growth. By refusing the title of leader, he escaped accountability. Agreement became authenticity. Resistance became self-deception. Compliance felt like integrity. Once the self was framed as something to dissolve, boundaries lost moral weight. Decisions could be outsourced without feeling surrendered. From the inside, the system felt permissive. From the outside, patterns of dominance were visible. What felt like freedom functioned as narrowing. The architecture adapted. Followers began correcting one another, reframing doubts, policing language. Control migrated from person to system. Nothing here required ignorance or desperation. Many entered searching for coherence. The worldview was internally consistent, contradictions absorbed through metaphor. Challenges reframed as misunderstanding. The system was closed, but it did not feel sealed. By the time the framework stabilized, belief no longer required reinforcement. It had become environment. Thought moved within it the way water moves within a container, guided, constrained, unnoticed. This is how control becomes inhabitable, not imposed, not announced, but lived, as if it were simply how things are. There is rarely a single moment when belief becomes action. There is a phase where interpretation replaces choice. As the system matured, Manson spoke less directly. Explanations gave way to fragments. Sentences trailed off. Statements invited completion. Meaning was no longer delivered, it was assembled. This was not confusion. It was calibration. Those who completed the gaps correctly demonstrated alignment. Those who did not learn they were not yet seeing clearly. Initiative replaced obedience. The most valued followers anticipated meaning rather than waiting for instruction. Fear internalized. No enforcement was needed. The risk was not punishment. It was misinterpretation. To misunderstand was to reveal ego. Doubt now threatened identity, not belonging. Isolation deepened epistemically. External reality became irrelevant, even irritating. News, law, social norms dismissed as noise. Only internal reference points remained valid. From the inside, this felt like confidence. From the outside, it appeared as detachment, authority concentrated around interpretation. Approval arrived retroactively. A nod, a look, a brief phrase. Responsibility shifted backward. When action followed, it felt pre-decided, not chosen. Language shifted, fewer I statements, more passive constructions. Things happened, events unfolded, agency blurred. Moral categories dissolved. The question was no longer right or wrong. It was alignment. Once belief systems generate their own justification, external input loses relevance. Interpretation becomes identity. Identity resists revision not because it is rigid, but because it feels complete. By the time outcomes became visible, the psychological work was finished. From the inside, nothing felt sudden. From the outside, everything appeared to change at once. The architecture did not exist in isolation. It functioned because it was misread. Institutions recognize acts, not processes. They respond to violations, not slow transformations of belief. What unfolded did not resemble an organization. It resembled drift, and drift does not announce intent. Language obscured detection. The group was categorized using familiar labels: disorganized, transient, harmless. Belief systems that deny being belief systems are difficult to confront. They present as absence. Authorities looked for hierarchy. Found informality, looked for commands. Found suggestion, looked for threat. Found ambiguity. Each metric failed. Intervention required acknowledging that control can exist without force. That harm can incubate in language. That admission widened responsibility. So clarity was postponed. Each interaction treated as isolated. Each file closed independently. Patterns require memory. Bureaucracy fragments it. From the inside, non-intervention felt validating. From the outside, it was restraint. Restraint felt ethical. But restraint functioned as permission. By the time attention arrived, the narrative had hardened. Focus shifted to acts, not antecedents. Responsibility localized. The question became who, not how. The system did not fail from indifference. It failed from misalignment of lenses. When harm finally registered, it appeared sudden. In reality, it had been accumulating quietly. By the time the pattern was visible, it was no longer a pattern, it was an aftermath. The cost did not announce itself as suffering. It arrived disguised as function. By the time action replaced deliberation, individuals no longer experienced themselves as decision makers. Identity had thinned. What remained was role. Language reveals erosion first. Pronouns receded. Feelings translated into signals. Fear became ego. Hesitation became static. Compassion reframed as weakness. Loyalty measured by follow-through. Refusal risked disintegration. Fear narrowed. It no longer warned, it guided. Isolation reached its final form, not loneliness, encapsulation. When the moment arrived, there was no debate to interrupt momentum. From the inside, it felt calm. From the outside, it appears as absence. Authority was internal. The voice remained even when the speaker was gone. Harm lost language. Without vocabulary for objection, objection became unthinkable. What is often misunderstood is the absence of visible distress. This is not evidence of cruelty. It is evidence of belief capture. The cost extended beyond action. It included the aftermath, the slow return of agency, guilt without context, memory without distance. What was experienced as relief functioned as erasure. The deepest cost was the loss of hesitation, the capacity to pause and treat resistance as meaningful. What lingers is not the figure, it is the shape. These mechanisms did not require him. They require conditions, uncertainty without support, identity under strain, language that promises coherence without accountability. They travel as techniques, as habits of speech, as ways of defining insight and dismissing doubt. From the inside, they feel stabilizing. From the outside, corrosive. The danger is not intensity, it is coherence without permeability. There is no alarm when belief becomes infrastructure. It sounds like agreement. It feels like relief. The echo is not historical, it is structural. At what point does understanding become obedience? At what point does coherence begin to cost more than confusion? There is no clean answer. Only a tension that persists between certainty and the fragile effort of thinking without it. The echo does not fade. It waits for conditions to repeat,